Clara won the boardroom war, but the battle behind closed doors has only just begun. The secret is out, and Marcus has moved his runaway wife directly into his Tribeca penthouse, completely erasing her old life. Worse? She realizes he hasn't just been waiting for her, he's been watching her every move for years. Clara tries to lay down ironclad boundaries to protect her heart. He cannot touch her unless she asks. But with Marcus standing right beside her as they execute ruthless corporate takeovers by day and trapping her against her glass desk by night, the tension is reaching a boiling point. How long can a fiercely independent lawyer hold out against a billionaire who will stop at nothing to make her surrender? Episode 16. The ride from the Sterling and Vance building to Tribeca was a masterclass in suffocating silence. Clara Scoth sat in the back of the Maybach, watching the Manhattan skyline blur past the tinted windows. She was exhausted, her adrenaline completely depleted after staring down a boardroom of 12 furious senior partners. But beneath the exhaustion was a live wire of anticipation that she couldn't suppress. The war at the office was won. But as the car glided to a halt in front of an ultra-exclusive residential high-rise, Clara realized the true battle was just beginning. Marcus stepped out of the car, offering his hand. Clara looked at it for a fraction of a second before placing her hand in his. His fingers immediately curled around hers, his thumb brushing over the cheap silver ring that now permanently resided on her left hand. The private elevator opened directly into Marcus's penthouse. Clara stepped off the plush carpet of the elevator and onto sleek, imported dark hardwood. She stopped in the entryway, taking in the space. It was exactly what she expected the CEO's sanctuary to look like: expansive, minimalist, and aggressively expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the Hudson River. The color palette was all charcoal, slate, and cold steel. It was a beautiful, sterile fortress. "You can leave your coat on the chair," Marcus said, walking past her to shrug off his suit jacket. He tossed it onto a massive leather sofa. "I'll have the staff properly organize the closets tomorrow." Clara frowned, clutching her briefcase. "I need to go back to my apartment, Marcus. I don't have any clothes for tomorrow, and I need my files for the reorganization committee." Marcus walked to the heavy marble kitchen island and poured 2 glasses of water from a glass carafe. He didn't look back at her. "You don't have an apartment anymore, Clara." Clara froze. The quiet hum of the penthouse suddenly felt deafening. "Excuse me." Marcus turned around, sliding a glass across the marble counter toward her. His dark eyes were completely unapologetic. "While we were in Las Vegas, I had my executive assistant contact your landlord. I bought out your lease, hired a premium relocation team, and had your belongings packed." You packed my apartment?" Clara's voice cracked, the lawyer in her struggling to process the sheer audacity of the violation. "Without my permission? You broke my lease?" "You are my wife," Marcus stated simply, taking a sip of his water. "And as we established in front of the national press and our corporate board today, we are no longer hiding that fact. It would be highly irregular for a billionaire CEO's wife to maintain a 600-square-foot walk-up in Brooklyn." Clara dropped her briefcase. It hit the hardwood with a loud smack. "It is my space," Clara yelled, the exhaustion instantly vaporizing into pure, white-hot fury. She marched across the living room, stopping right in front of the kitchen island. "You do not get to just erase my life because it doesn't fit your aesthetic. Those were my things. My privacy." Marcus set his glass down. The corporate detachment vanished. In one fluid motion, he rounded the marble island, closing the distance between them until Clara was forced to tilt her head back to look at him. He didn't touch her, but the sheer gravity of his towering frame was enough to pin her in place. "Your life," Marcus growled, his voice dropping into a dark, territorial timbre. "Your life was a holding pattern, Clara. You spent 3 years working 80 hours a week and sleeping in an apartment that looked like a hotel room because you were terrified of putting down roots. You were terrified of stopping. I was building my career, Clara hissed, her chest heaving, refusing to back down. You were hiding, Marcus corrected softly, his eyes dropping to her trembling lips before locking back onto her eyes. From me. From Vegas. From the fact that you belong exactly where you are standing right now. Clara's breath hitched. She wanted to slap him. She wanted to scream at him for his high-handed, arrogant, suffocating control. But worse than the anger was the terrifying, treasonous warmth spreading through her chest. No one had ever fought for her like this. No one had ever torn down her walls with such absolute, unapologetic devotion. You are a dictator, Clara whispered, her hands balling into fists at her sides to keep from reaching out to him. I am a man who finally has his wife under his roof, Marcus replied, his voice a low, lethal hum. He reached out, his large hands gripping her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. The contact sent a violent jolt of electricity straight down her spine. The memory of their kiss in the boardroom hallway flared in the narrow space between them, heavy and undeniable. Your clothes are in the master suite, Marcus murmured, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, making her shiver instantly. Your files are organized on the desk in the home office. I didn't erase your life, Clara. I moved it. Because from now on, where I go, you go. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his expression a mixture of a challenge and a promise. Now, Marcus said, his thumb grazing her jawline. Are you going to keep fighting me on the logistics of our address, or are you going to let me show you our bedroom? And that's the end of episode 16. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback helps us know you're watching and encourages us to keep bringing you more content. See you in the next episode. Episode 17. The words hung in the sterile, expensive air of the penthouse. Are you going to keep fighting me on the logistics of our address, or are you going to let me show you our bedroom? Clara stared up at him. Her heart was hammering a frantic, violent rhythm against her ribs, completely betraying the cold, courtroom facade she was desperately trying to maintain. Marcus wasn't just invading her professional life anymore. He had completely annexed her personal reality. She took a slow, deliberate half-step back, breaking the intoxicating heat of his physical proximity. I am not a piece of furniture you can just acquire and place in your penthouse, Marcus, Clara said, her voice shaking with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. I need boundaries. If I am going to live here, if we are going to survive the next 2 weeks without killing each other, I need to know my space is my own. Marcus didn't argue. He simply let his hands fall from her waist, his dark eyes never leaving hers. Follow me, he commanded softly. He turned and walked down the wide, dimly lit hallway. Clara hesitated for a fraction of a second before picking up her briefcase. Her heels clicked softly against the dark hardwood as she followed him, feeling exactly like a prisoner being led to her cell. Marcus stopped in front of a set of heavy, double oak doors at the end of the hall. He pushed them open and stepped aside. Clara walked in. The breath completely left her lungs. The master suite was massive, flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering expanse of the city. But it wasn't the sheer size of the room or the obscenely large, modern canopy bed in the center that made her freeze. It was the details. In the corner of the room, positioned perfectly by the glass to catch the morning light, was a custom-built mahogany reading nook. It was filled with exact replicas of the antique legal texts she had scoured rare bookstores for in law school. On the small wet bar near the ensuite bathroom sat a state-of-the-art espresso machine, flanked by 3 bags of the obscure, hyper-caffeinated Italian roast she drank every morning. And the closet. The massive, walk-in glass wardrobe was open. Clara expected to see Marcus's endless rows of charcoal suits. Instead, the closet was 70% hers. Her tailored blazers, her silk blouses, her expensive stilettos, all meticulously organized by color and season. Clara felt a cold prickle of sheer terror slide down her spine. This wasn't the work of a relocation team throwing things into boxes. This was curation. She spun around. Marcus was leaning against the doorframe, watching her closely, his hands casually shoved into his pockets. "You didn't just buy my firm," Clara whispered, her eyes wide as she looked at the espresso beans. "You didn't just pack my apartment. You've been watching me. For years. I have a security detail that provides regular updates on all my vital assets," Marcus replied smoothly. His tone was casual, but his eyes were entirely predatory. "I knew when you made June your partner. I knew when you started taking your coffee black because you were working 80-hour weeks. I knew you paced the floor of your tiny Brooklyn apartment at 3 a.m. whenever you had a deposition the next day." Clara's chest heaved. "That is psycho, Marcus. That is stalking." "That is devotion," Marcus corrected, his voice dropping into a dark, unapologetic register as he walked into the room. He stopped at the edge of the massive bed. "You ran from me in Vegas. You changed your number. You disappeared into the Manhattan corporate machine. Did you really think I was just going to let you vanish?" "I wanted to vanish." Clara shot back, dropping her briefcase onto a velvet chaise lounge. "I wanted to be a lawyer, not a billionaire's secret Vegas mistake. You had no right to track me like a piece of property." Marcus crossed the room in 2 strides. Before Clara could retreat, his hands were on her arms, his grip firm but not bruising. He pulled her close, forcing her to look up into his face. "You are not my property, Clara," Marcus growled, the raw intensity in his voice stripping away every ounce of his polished armor. "You are my wife. And for 6 years, I let you build your empire. I stayed out of your way. I let you become the fiercest, most untouchable litigator in this city because I knew that was what you needed to do." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was heavy, matching her own frantic rhythm. "But you reached the top," Marcus whispered, his lips brushing hers as he spoke. "You proved your point. And my patience ran out." Clara closed her eyes, entirely overwhelmed by the suffocating weight of his confession. He hadn't just ambushed her. He had waited for her. He had calculated exactly when she would be powerful enough to stand beside him, and then he had sprung the trap. "I hate you," Clara breathed, though the words lacked the venom they held in Las Vegas. "I know," Marcus murmured, his thumb stroking the side of her neck, finding her racing pulse. Clara opened her eyes, forcing herself to push against his chest. She needed a boundary before she completely drowned in him. "If I am sleeping in this bed," Clara said, her voice trembling but resolute, "we have rules. I am still leading the reorganization committee tomorrow. I need to sleep. You do not touch me unless I ask." Marcus didn't fight her. He took a slow, deliberate step back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. But the devastating, arrogant smirk that touched his lips was a clear warning. "Deal," Marcus said softly, his dark eyes dropping to her mouth before sliding back up to meet her gaze. "But Clara..." "What?" she snapped defensively. "You are going to ask." And that's the end of episode 17. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback helps us know you're watching and encourages us to keep bringing you more content. See you in the next episode. Episode 18. Clara didn't sleep. Not really. She spent her first night in the master suite hovering on the extreme right edge of the massive California king bed, hyper-aware of the man sleeping on the left. Marcus hadn't crossed the invisible boundary line. He hadn't reached for her in the dark. He had simply laid down, his breathing settling into a slow, steady rhythm that drove Clara absolutely insane. "You do not touch me unless I ask." It was a boundary she desperately needed to establish to protect her sanity. But as Clara stepped out of the marble shower at 6 a.m., wrapping herself in a plush towel, she realized the terrifying truth of Marcus's compliance. He wasn't respecting her boundary to be a gentleman. He was using it as psychological warfare. When Clara walked into the sprawling kitchen 30 minutes later, fully armored in a razor-sharp charcoal blazer and a silk ivory blouse, Marcus was already there. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a tailored black suit that made him look like an executioner. He was reviewing a tablet, holding a steaming mug in his other hand. The heavy, dark scent of the Italian espresso he had sourced specifically for her filled the kitchen. "Good morning," Clara said, her voice strictly professional, masking the traitorous flutter of her pulse. Marcus turned. His dark eyes did a slow, meticulous sweep of her outfit, lingering for a fraction of a second on the silver ring on her left hand before meeting her gaze. "Your espresso is on the island," Marcus murmured, his voice a low, gravelly timbre that suggested he hadn't spoken to anyone else yet. "I adjusted the grind. It should match the extraction you prefer." Clara walked to the marble island and picked up the delicate porcelain cup. She took a sip. It was flawless. It was exactly how she made it in her tiny Brooklyn kitchen. "Thank you," Clara said, hating how breathless she sounded. She reached for the tablet resting next to the espresso machine. "Have the initial asset reports from the reorganization committee come in?" Marcus stepped closer, moving into her airspace. Clara braced herself, her skin prickling with anticipation. But Marcus stopped exactly 2 feet away. He reached past her, his sleeve grazing the air inches from her arm, and tapped the screen of her tablet to unlock it. He didn't touch her. "The reports are loaded," Marcus said smoothly, completely ignoring the fact that Clara had just stopped breathing. "The board is expecting a full audit of our internal holdings by noon. Are you ready to run the room, Miss Scoth?" Clara swallowed hard, forcing her legal mind to reboot. "I am always ready to run the room, Mr. Croft. And it's Mrs. Croft now. Or did you forget your own press conference?" A slow, devastating smirk touched the corner of Marcus's mouth. "I haven't forgotten a single second of it, wife. Drink your coffee. We have an empire to dismantle." At 7:45 a.m., the 42nd floor of Sterling and Vance was a hive of nervous, vibrating energy. When the private executive elevator dinged and the silver door slid open, the entire bullpen went dead silent. Phones stopped ringing. Paralegals froze mid-step. Clara stepped out first. She didn't look down. She didn't shrink under the weight of 50 staring eyes. She kept her chin high, her briefcase gripped firmly in her hand, radiating the absolute, untouchable authority of a senior partner. Marcus walked exactly half a step behind her. It was a deliberate, highly calculated physical position. He wasn't leading her, he was backing her up. He was a silent, lethal shadow, broadcasting a terrifying message to everyone in the room. Asterisk, she is the apex predator. I am just the muscle. Asterisk. As they approached the glass CEO suite, Emma, the junior paralegal, jumped up from her desk, her eyes wide with panic. "Mr. Croft." "Miss Scoth, I mean, Mrs. Croft." The board members are already gathering in conference room A for the reorganization kickoff," Emma stammered, clutching a stack of files. "Have the quarterly financial disclosures printed and placed at every seat," Emma, Clara ordered, not breaking her stride as she pushed through the heavy glass doors of her office. "And I want a junior associate on standby to draft liquidation notices." "Yes, ma'am," Emma squeaked, practically sprinting toward the copy room. Clara dropped her briefcase onto her immaculate desk. She looked through the transparent glass wall that separated her office from Marcus's. He had walked directly into his own space, shedding his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves, revealing the silver scar on his wrist. He looked up, catching her eye through the glass. He didn't smile. He just gave her a single, slow nod. "Your move." At exactly 8 a.m., Clara walked into conference room A. The 12 senior partners, including Arthur Sterling, were already seated. The atmosphere was thick with resentment, caution, and the lingering tension of yesterday's failed coup. Clara didn't sit in her usual chair near the middle of the table. She walked directly to the head of the long mahogany table. Marcus entered a second later and took the seat immediately to her right. He leaned back, steepling his fingers, completely ceding the floor to her. "Good morning, gentlemen," Clara said, her voice ringing like struck crystal in the quiet room. She didn't open a file. She didn't look at her notes. She looked directly at the men who had tried to vote her out of the firm 24 hours ago. Yesterday, this firm severed ties with Dean Enterprise. As a result, we are currently holding $40 million in unallocated capital that was earmarked for the acquisition, Clara announced, her gaze locking onto the head of the accounting division. We are not returning that capital to the holding accounts. We are aggressively acquiring the 3 mid-tier boutique litigation firms that have been undercutting our commercial division for the last 2 quarters. A murmur of shock rippled through the partners. Hostile takeovers? Arthur Sterling asked, his bushy eyebrows raising. 3 at once? That requires a massive mobilization of our legal team. It's a bloodbath. It is a consolidation of power, Clara corrected sharply, planting her hands flat on the mahogany table. Dean Enterprise tried to make us look weak. They leaked a scandal to the press to tank our stock price. The only acceptable response is to prove that Sterling and Vance is more liquid, more aggressive, and more dangerous today than we were yesterday. I want the buyout proposals drafted by 5 p.m. She looked to her right. Does the CEO have any objections to this strategy? Marcus looked at her. His dark eyes were burning with a terrifying, absolute pride. He looked at her like she was a weapon he had personally forged, and she was finally firing on all cylinders. The CEO, Marcus murmured, his voice a rich, dark velvet that sent a shiver straight down Clara's spine, agrees with his lead counsel entirely. Execute the takeovers. The meeting dissolved into frantic, high-stakes action. Partners scrambled to assign associates, screaming into phones to halt trading and lock down non-disclosure agreements. Through it all, Clara stood at the head of the table, commanding the chaos. When the room finally cleared an hour later, only Marcus and Clara remained. Clara slumped slightly, the adrenaline crashing. She reached for her water glass, her hand shaking slightly from the sheer velocity of the morning. Marcus stood up. He walked slowly around the mahogany table until he was standing right beside her chair. Clara froze. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off his body, smell the bergamot and scotch that clung to his skin. She wanted him to reach out. She wanted him to put his hand on her shoulder, to ground her after the fight. Her skin was practically screaming for the contact. Marcus leaned down, his face inches from hers. His dark eyes tracked the frantic pulse hammering at the base of her throat. "You are magnificent," Marcus whispered, his voice a hoarse, intimate rasp. He didn't touch her. He pulled back, picked up his tablet, and walked toward the door. "Marcus," Clara blurted out, her voice betraying her before her legal mind could stop it. Marcus paused at the door, turning his head slightly. The arrogant, devastatingly patient smirk on his lips told her he knew exactly what he was doing. "Yes, Clara," he asked softly. Clara's hands curled into fists. She was losing her mind. And it had only been 24 hours. "Nothing," Clara lied, her jaw tight. "I'll see you in the executive suite." And that's the end of episode 18. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback helps us know you're watching and encourages us to keep bringing you more content. See you in the next episode. Episode 19. By 8:30 p.m., the 42nd floor of Sterling and Vance had thinned out, but it wasn't empty. A dozen junior associates were still chained to their desks in the bullpen, drafting the hostile takeover proposals Clara had demanded that morning. Clara sat in her transparent, floor-to-ceiling glass office, rubbing the tight, throbbing knot forming at her right temple. The glow of her dual monitors was beginning to burn her retinas. She had spent the last 10 hours operating on pure, lethal adrenaline, but the crash was imminent. She dropped her pen and let her head fall back against her leather chair. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to look through the glass wall that separated her office from the CEO's suite. Marcus was already watching her. He had taken off his tie hours ago. The top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, and he was leaning back in his chair in the dimly lit office, his dark eyes locked onto her with a heavy, unwavering intensity. He looked like a predator who had infinite patience. The red light on Clara's desk phone began to blink. The sharp, mechanical ring cut through the quiet of her office. She glanced at the caller ID. Extension 01 CEO. Clara picked up the receiver, keeping her eyes locked on Marcus through the glass. Yes, Mr. Croft? You have a migraine. Marcus's low, gravelly voice echoed through the earpiece. The intimate timbre of his voice fed directly into her ear, contrasting violently with the physical barrier between them. I have a 200-page liquidation brief, Clara corrected, her voice perfectly even. The migraine is just collateral damage. You haven't eaten since the espresso at 7 a.m., Marcus observed over the line. I am billing hours, Marcus. I don't have time to eat. You don't bill by the hour anymore, Clara. You own the firm. The line clicked dead. Through the glass, Clara watched Marcus set his phone down. He stood up, picked up a brown paper bag sitting on the edge of his mahogany desk, and walked toward the connecting door. Clara's heart did a slow, heavy roll against her ribs. He pushed the door open. The scent of spicy, heavily garlic-infused Szechuan immediately overpowered the sterile smell of office cleaner and printer ink. I am not hungry, Clara lied immediately. Marcus didn't listen. He walked around her desk, completely invading her airspace. He didn't just place the bag on her desk, he leaned over her to do it. He braced one hand on her armrest and the other on the edge of her desk, effectively trapping her in her chair. His chest was inches from her face. The heat rolling off his body was an intoxicating, suffocating wave. Spicy Dan noodles, Marcus murmured, looking down at her, his dark eyes heavy with implication. From the cash-only place in Queens you used to order from every time you pulled an all-nighter for the bar exam. Clara stopped breathing. She stared at the paper bag, then slowly tilted her head back to look at him. You really are a psychopath. Eat the noodles, Clara, Marcus whispered. He didn't move away. He stayed leaning over her, his physical proximity pushing every single one of her sensory receptors to the absolute brink. Clara looked past his shoulder, out into the bullpen. 3 junior associates were blatantly staring at them through the glass walls. To the outside world, they couldn't hear the conversation, but the optics were undeniable. The billionaire CEO trapping his new wife against her desk in the middle of the night. People are watching, Clara whispered, her voice tightening with panic and a dark, dangerous thrill she couldn't suppress. They can see us. Let them watch, Marcus growled softly. Let them see exactly how close I stand to you. Clara's hands gripped the edge of her chair. She was vibrating with tension. You do not touch me unless I ask. It was the rule she had set. And he was using it to torture her. He was waiting for her to break. Move back, Marcus, Clara commanded, her voice shaking entirely too much to sound authoritative. Marcus lowered his head a fraction of an inch, his lips brushing the air just above her ear. Make me, he challenged, the dark velvet of his voice vibrating against her skin. Push me away, Clara. Or ask me to stay. The air in the glass office became heavy, charged with invisible electricity. Every instinct in Clara's body screamed at her to close the final inch between them, to grab his shirt and pull him down. The memory of his mouth on hers in the boardroom hallway was a live coal in the center of her chest. She looked up, meeting his burning, possessive gaze. She didn't ask. But she didn't push him away either. Slowly, deliberately, Clara reached up. She didn't touch his skin. She grabbed the silk lapel of his suit jacket. Her knuckles brushed against his chest as she pulled him down just a fraction of an inch closer, holding him exactly where she wanted him. I told you I needed boundaries, Clara whispered fiercely, her eyes locked on his. Marcus stared down at her hand gripping his suit, a slow, devastating, triumphant smile spreading across his face. And I am respecting them, wife, Marcus murmured, his breath hot against her lips. But we both know it's only a matter of time before you shatter the glass yourself. And that's the end of episode 19. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback helps us know you're watching and encourages us to keep bringing you more content. See you in the next episode. Episode 20. The silk of Marcus's lapel was smooth and cool beneath Clara's knuckles, a sharp contrast to the blistering heat radiating off his chest. She held him there, suspended in the charged airspace of her glass office. Beyond the transparent walls, the bullpen was a frozen tableau of wide-eyed junior associates pretending not to stare. They were entirely exposed. Every ragged breath, every microscopic shift in Marcus's jaw was magnified by the neon lights of the Manhattan skyline outside. Asterisk, push me away, Clara. Or ask me to stay. Asterisk, his challenge echoed in her mind, a lethal dare perfectly designed to unravel her. Clara looked into his dark, burning eyes. She saw the absolute certainty there, the arrogant, devastating belief that he had finally cornered her, that her professional armor had cracked under the weight of his proximity. Slowly, the litigator inside her woke up. Clara didn't push him away. She didn't kiss him either. Instead, she leaned forward just a fraction of an inch more, her lips hovering a breath away from his jaw. "You think this is a surrender," Clara whispered, her voice a deadly, silken threat that only he could hear. "You think because my pulse is racing, you've won." Marcus's breathing hitched. The muscles in his chest tightened beneath her knuckles. "Clara." "I don't surrender, Marcus," she interrupted, her voice completely steady now, the adrenaline transmuting into pure, cold power. "And I certainly don't beg. You want to prove you belong in my space? Start by respecting my clock. I have 200 pages of liquidation strategy to finalize, and your noodles are getting cold." With agonizing deliberation, Clara released his lapel. She smoothed her hands down the front of her own charcoal blazer, sat back in her leather chair, and turned her eyes back to her dual monitors. She didn't look at him. She just picked up her pen. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack the glass. For 3 seconds, Marcus didn't move. He stood braced over her desk, his chest heaving as he stared at the side of her face. The predatory confidence had been entirely wiped out, replaced by a dark, volatile mixture of shock and profound, terrifying reverence. "Eat your dinner, wife," Marcus finally rasped. He pushed off the desk, turned on his heel, and walked out of her office. He didn't go back to his own suite. He walked straight toward the private executive elevators, leaving the 42nd floor entirely. Clara's hand shook so violently she dropped her pen the second the elevator doors closed. She had won the battle. But as the spicy scent of the Dan noodles filled her office, she realized she was terrifyingly close to losing the war. It was 1:15 a.m. when the private elevator opened directly into the Tribeca penthouse. Clara was dead on her feet. Her blazer was draped over her arm, her heels dangling from her fingers. The hostile takeover proposals were filed, the board was updated, and she had officially cemented herself as the most ruthless partner at Sterling and Vance. She stepped onto the dark hardwood, expecting the penthouse to be empty. It wasn't. The living room was completely dark, save for the faint, ambient glow of the city filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus was sitting in one of the massive leather armchairs facing the glass. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie, and a crystal glass of amber scotch rested in his hand. He didn't turn around when the elevator chimed. "You worked a 17-hour day," Marcus stated, his voice a low, gravelly vibration in the dark. "The liquidations were complex," Clara replied, dropping her briefcase by the marble console. She was too tired for armor. She walked slowly into the living room, stopping a few feet from his chair. "Arthur Sterling called me at midnight," Marcus continued, taking a slow sip of his scotch. "He said you systematically dismantled 3 rival firms with a level of aggression he hasn't seen in 30 years. He called you a weapon. Is that a complaint, Mr. Croft?" Marcus finally turned his head. The shadows in the room caught the sharp angles of his jaw and the exhaustion in his own eyes. "No," he said softly. He set the crystal glass down on a side table. "It is an observation. You spent 6 years sharpening yourself into a blade just to make sure no one could ever touch you again. Not the board. Not Chloe Dean. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Not me. Clara swallowed, the dry air of the penthouse suddenly feeling heavy. I did what I had to do to survive. Marcus stood up. In the dark, his towering frame was imposing, but his movements were deliberately slow, almost cautious. He crossed the few feet of space between them, stopping just outside her immediate reach. I don't want you to survive, Clara, Marcus whispered, the raw sincerity in his voice breaking through his corporate facade completely. I want you to live. I want you to stop looking at me like I am a hostile takeover. I didn't drag you into the light to ruin you. I did it because I was tired of watching the woman I love pretend she didn't exist. The word hit the air like a physical blow. Love. Clara stopped breathing. Her briefcase, her partnership, the billions of dollars in corporate assets, none of it mattered in the face of the terrifying, absolute vulnerability he had just laid at her feet. Don't say that, Clara whispered, a tear finally breaking free and tracking down her cheek. You don't play fair, Marcus. You trap me, you corner me, and then you say things like that. Marcus closed the final distance between them. He didn't hesitate. He reached out, his large, warm hands gently framing her face. His thumbs carefully wiped the tear from her skin. I have never played fair when it comes to you, Marcus murmured, his forehead resting against hers. And I never will. I told you I would give you the bed. I told you I wouldn't touch you unless you asked. I will sleep on that couch until my spine breaks if it proves to you that I am not your enemy. Clara closed her eyes, entirely consumed by the scent of him, the heat of his skin, and the devastating reality that she was tired of fighting. She was so incredibly tired of being alone. You are going to ask. He had warned her in the master suite. He had known, with the infuriating confidence of a man who had already memorized her soul, that she wouldn't last. Clara slowly opened her eyes. She reached up, her hands wrapping around his wrists where they held her face. She didn't push him away. She anchored him to her. Marcus, Clara whispered, her voice trembling, stripping away the very last piece of her armor. Yes, wife, he breathed, his eyes heavy and dark with anticipation. Touch me. And that's the end of episode 20. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback helps us know you're watching and encourages us to keep bringing you more content. See you in the next episode.